Hannah Schwausch,
Hi.
welcome to the Grind Diaries.
One of the main things that people tend to come to me for is understanding their why. Consistency and discipline have to be in place more so than motivation, because the motivation will ebb and flow. On the outside, I had the house, the business, the life, the freedom. I did have what essentially is, classed as a lot of people's dream. I felt so incredibly stuck and so incredibly alone and isolated in that space. Almost a victim of my own success, so I built it to a place where it could sustain, it ran amazingly, it paid for everything. But I didn't know how to make a change out of it, because I had to essentially stay at that level to maintain everything around me. But also I was desperately unhappy. We are better at staying on track when it's a positive thing at the end, but quite often a lot of us start with getting away from something that we don't like. Hello.
How you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Good. This has been I feel like this has been a long time coming, because for those of you who don't know, Hannah's a life coach, and Hannah and I worked together a little bit, or Hannah came into the business that I was working for to do some life coaching. And my God, how long ago was that?
It was the end of 2022.
Blimey. So, yeah, so that long ago, and we were talking about starting this, weren't we, that long ago, and it was all about what the things that I kind of wanted to do in life and blah, 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 and you were very much a bit of a pillar for what's stopping you, and you really helped me to kind of break down the barriers that I had to stuff exactly like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so you were one of the first people that I asked to come on the podcast, which again feels so long ago. But yeah, just really pleased to have you on, so thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you.
Do you want to just tell a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I am a performance and wellbeing coach. When I worked with you, it was more the corporate side of coaching,
Yeah.
So slightly different to the private side. And I work with a lot of people who are, especially the one-to-ones, it's more stuckness, realising what it is that they need to do, what's getting in their way, and figuring things out. And one of the main things that people tend to come to me for is understanding their why. So I think sometimes coaching can be we jump a lot of stages ahead, and actually what we need to do is start a lot smaller and be quite realistic with where we're at already, to then start making changes, because the dreams are fabulous, but unless you actually are honest and realistic about where you are right now, it's very easy to sort of, you've got your start point and you've got your end point, but the whole bit in the middle is actually where it needs to happen and the work. And if you don't do that part, it's very easy to not get to the end. So
people come to you because they don't really know what they want, or they know what they want but they don't know why?
I think it's more to do with the fact that if you ask, the analogy I always use is fitness. So if you say to someone, what is it that you need to do to get in shape? Everyone knows the answer.
Yeah.
But it's why can they not do it? And essentially that's the part I get very interested in, because we do know usually what it is that we need or want to do, but there's often a reason why we can't do it. And unless we know that why and understand it and take action, because of course understanding isn't going to be enough, but if we actually know what's going on initially and we're honest about it, because if you are time poor, if you do have no work-life balance, if you don't sleep properly, whatever's going on it's all relevant. So those things have to be considered for you to then start making changes and moving forwards. Without doing that part, you're going to fail in the long run, because it's much harder to do.
So is it using the fitness analogy?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I've sort of struggled with my health, I basically, my lifestyle hasn't been great over the past few years. Is it because when I always look at it, right, like, as you say, I know what I have to do, but it's actually doing it is the problem.
Yeah.
Is that because I don't want it enough? Or is it because, is there other underlying reasons that I'm not doing it?
I think that's subjective. I think because the not wanting it enough can make people feel disempowered straight away. I think people do want things, but I think you have to be realistic with your micro actions and micro habits to get to your macro results. And a lot of us, we go all in from nothing to 100, but very little in the middle. And I think that the consistency part is where it's at, but it's also understanding what you want, but understanding what is possibly going to get in your way. And it's not to say that doesn't mean you can't get there. It just means you're realistic about how you get there.
Yeah.
Because you're much more inclined to fail if you pretend like none of that is a real issue. And I'm working with a gym at the moment where we're flipping the fitness side to work with the mental side of it, the coaching side of it, that's not just PTs, to basically look at that side of things. Because if people have got good intentions, like, if they know what they need to do to get to where it is that they want to get to, but can't get there, it's the why piece that's important.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I mean, like, I don't really know what it was that was stopping me kind of, sorting my health out. But I think I've always been like a bit of an all or nothing person, whereas like I'm all in with the health and fitness, or I'm completely all out, and it's like alcohol, just not really, just eating whatever, like not really watching what I eat. And then, like, what are we now, 5-6 weeks into the year, and I've been really good. I've been really consistent, and I found that at the start it was easy because it's quite new, and you're getting results really quickly. And like now is the time that's really difficult to keep the consistency because it's now boring, and the results aren't as good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess that's when stuff that you're talking about really kind of kicks in.
Absolutely.
Because you kind of get over the initial excitement of doing something new, whatever that might be.
Yes.
And then, like, it's the kind of 5, 6, maybe 8 week point where it's like, now's where you kind of find the consistency and the discipline.
Absolutely. And if you think about, if you're painting a room, and especially if it's a white room already and you're painting it white again, initially it's that you've got that motivation to get it done, but then after a while it's the same thing and it looks the same and it's quite tedious. And I think consistency and discipline have to be in place more so than motivation, because the motivation will ebb and flow, but those two things, if you can fall back on the good habits, it then creates even if it's not every day or every week, if you go back to it, you're still moving all the time. And I think you've got to take into consideration those first things, which are, be realistic about where you're at initially, because that will determine how your journey looks as well. And I think the wellness industry and the rhetoric is very often online. It's quite simplistic at times. And it makes people actually feel worse about themselves because they genuinely think that they're the problem and they can't do it. When actually, if you look at your whole life, if you zoom out and look at things and you've got shitloads going on, it's not very easy sometimes. It's not always easy to make changes. They are possible, but you have to do them in a realistic way. And I think that information at times can actually make people feel worse about themselves because they then doubt their abilities when actually, you can do it, but you also, let's do it in a realistic way.
Yeah, and I think, just on that point as well about the information that's out there, I think there's, particularly in the kind of health and wellness field, there's so much conflicting information.
Absolutely.
Like, people haven't got a clue really what to do, because you've got one guy saying eat nothing but meat, one guy saying eat nothing but plants, somebody else saying, oh no, you can eat Rice Krispie square, and it's just like, what is the, what is right? And I guess the answer to it is like, we're all individual, so it's what works best for the person.
Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting. What is your definition of success?
Definition of success is, I think, balance. Having balance that works for you. I think it's quite subjective in terms of what you need maybe as a person, but I very much like to have a work life which is very meaningful. It makes a difference to people. It's an interpersonal kind of experience where I can see that we go on a kind of a journey together, and I can see what difference it makes to them, and I find that incredibly fulfilling. And you've got to be realistic and be paid for it, obviously, but I think essentially it's more to do with, for me, it's more to do with the type of work I do and what I get back from the individual than probably anything else, and having the harmony in life, which again is not always easy to achieve, which I appreciate. So if sometimes we oversimplify things, because if you have money, for example, you might have more options with things. You might have different ways of doing things, which you don't necessarily have if you don't have finances. So I think it just depends on sort of what's important to me. And for me, it's definitely making a difference to people, and just working in lovely environments as well. I think I've realised that over time, that just being in nice, being able to kind of exercise when I want and have options makes a big difference.
Yeah.
But I think that's that is a privilege in some ways. Which is,
so, like, do you feel like you found that balance, or is it something you're still kind of working towards?
I do think I've found that balance at the moment. I had two businesses side by side. That was very intense. So I sold my first business in 2024 last year, and then it's given me space, and it's the first time in 12 years that I've actually had mental sort of clarity to be able to focus on this. Again, that's come off the back of I was single for a while, so I was running a house, running a business, doing everything kind of solo, and then the shift has happened because I'm now in a partnership, in a relationship. And again, I acknowledge, from going from one to the other, I acknowledge actually what a difference that makes as well, and how much that changes everything else. And I think sometimes that can be overlooked, because essentially it gives me different options that I wouldn't have had if I was still single, potentially. So it's acknowledging those things, and actually being realistic about what's why it's like it is, I guess.
Yeah. So it's a really, really interesting one, because obviously, like, we get so many different answers on this, but one thing that I think is quite apparent in these conversations is that the success is less about like what you have, and it's more about what you do, like, as in, like, where is your lifestyle. So obviously money does play a part in that, because, like, as you pointed out, it gives you options. Like, it gives you you wouldn't necessarily have the options you had unless you were earning the money that you're earning, right? So where, like, is there a line, is there like a point where you say, I'm not going to take on any more work now because I've got my balance? Or do you kind of just like work it out as you go?
There's definitely a lot of figuring out, and I think initially, a lot of time on LinkedIn, a lot of time, which can sometimes be a negative, but just in the field that I'm already in, which then can end up paralyzing you in a way, because you then can be so you've got so many options on the table, you don't know which direction to go, and what's going to work or not. In that sense, it's forgot the question. But yeah.
I can't remember even now. That's cool. We'll cut that bit out. Don't worry.
Sorry, that threw me off. That's why.
Yeah, the screen's
changed. I was like, what's going on?
Yeah, don't worry. So yeah, if you don't mind, like, taking us back to, kind of where your journey started. So, like, you know, all the things that you think kind of led you to where you are now.
Yes. So I had a business for 12 years running a dog walking company. It was very successful. And it was an incredible work-life balance, which again, a lot of people want. Um, and it worked really well for a long time until probably in 2019. Then I was starting to feel the effects of my relationship had broken down. I was doing it solo, but then it was an awful lot of time solo because it was not only work but home as well. So it ended up being a lot of time sort of on my own. And then we we went into the pandemic, which again changed everything else because it meant that we were even more isolated and we were even more, in a place that we shouldn't have been. Or things, things had changed well out of our control. And I was really, really unhappy. So even though, I reflect a lot on it because I on the outside I had the house, the business, the life, the freedom. I did have what essentially is, classed as a lot of people's dream. But I felt so incredibly stuck and so incredibly alone and isolated in that space. And almost a victim of my own success. So I'd built it to a place where it could sustain. It ran amazingly. It paid for everything. But I didn't know how to make a change out of it because I had to essentially stay at that level to maintain everything around me. But also I was desperately unhappy. And it's a really difficult place to be because you know that you're in a good position in many ways and you feel that, but then at the same time so many of my needs that mainly mental needs weren't being met because I just wasn't I had no or very little community. I wasn't stimulated at all, so it's a lot of time to kind of just you're just on your own out and about, which is lovely, but then also in the UK it rains all the time. You don't realise quite how bad the weather is until you work outdoors. And then of course the pressures just increase with everything rocketing. So to try and run a business which is quite fixed costs, you've only got so much you can play with before it's it's either unfeasible for the clients or yourself. And that pressure was just going up and up and up like it is for everyone. And yeah, it was definitely a very, very testing time. And the pandemic in particular was highlighted an awful lot. And I knew I had to do something. And I actually ended up investing in a coaching course in America. And it was an in-person course because I thought it keeps me accountable. I have to show up. I didn't have a clue what to expect or what I was getting into really, but I knew that my strength is communication, and I know that I'm good at the rapport side of things. So I knew that I should be able to sort of get a good grip on things. Anyway, I did the course, which was about 9 months, and then it was a journey from then onwards, really, about just kind of figuring out how do I transition, how do I get into coaching. I've done a lot of free work, lots of offers on Facebook because I've done such a U-turn in my career. I didn't come from consultancy, I didn't come from mentoring, I didn't come from corporate, I didn't come from any industry that would essentially take me seriously, I thought anyway, from the off. So I just practiced and practiced. It offered to work with anyone, men, women, any age, any situation. I just wanted to see how it went, really. And the more I did it, the more I got really lovely results, and I just knew that it was somewhere that I wanted to stay. And that initial part where I was in my first business and how I felt was a massive, it played a huge part in the change, because you have push and pull motivators. We either are pulled towards something that gives us something very positive, like money or dopamine, or something that we get a positive feeling from. But we also have push motivators, which is to get away from things that we don't like, things that are painful or uncomfortable. And that's how we work. That's how our brains operate towards or away from what it is that we're trying to do. We are better at staying on track when it's a positive thing at the end, but quite often a lot of us start with getting away from something that we don't like. So, for example, if we don't like how we look physically, that is the driver to get us to the end result, because you're not going to get that feeling from that end result for a long time. So the push is where you are right now. And it was a really big reality check for me, where I had to change things and switch life up. So ended up doing coaching for free, and then I have a friend who works. They own an e-commerce business, and I asked if I could just do some in-house coaching. Again, I said I just want the experience. I had the time because I was still running my other business alongside. So it was the entry point for sort of working with individuals in a corporate setting and coaching them. So that was the next kind of stage, which resulted in then an 18-month contract and working with all the office staff one-to-one for 6 weeks, which was an amazing opportunity because of the experience it gave me. And along the way, there's heaps of imposter syndrome. It's a very interesting journey, because you know that you're capable and you're out of your comfort zone and you're doing all these things that feel shit scary, but you also, there is a part of you that knows that you're good as well, but the two coexist at the same time, and it's knowing that they can exist at the same time, and believing that what you're doing, you're still on track and it's good enough, because it's so easy to just cave and think, I can't do it.
It's quite interesting hearing you talk about that, because obviously I was working for the e-commerce. I'm assuming that's who you're talking about.
Yeah.
I was working for that e-commerce company, and I think I was involved in your first assignment, right?
Yeah.
So like that, helping one of the guys that was in my team, and like I don't think I knew that you were like not like it was new to you. I don't think I knew that properly, or like I certainly don't reflect on it being like, oh yeah, Hannah was really new to this then. And the changes that we saw in Dylan was incredible. Like, he's such a great guy, and I think that he had a thing where he was quite like what's the word? He was like, he would get frustrated about things, but they were kind of internal. And I think that you really helped him to kind of change that. And I actually think, and I don't want to take too much away from Dylan, because he worked really hard and really kind of progressed his career. I haven't spoken to him for a while, but I think that a lot of the change came from those conversations you had, and it was like once a week for like, I don't know, 6-8 weeks. So the impact was huge. And then I think because of that, it came to like, you went on to then talk to each individual person in the business, and it was really cool, because it kind of just put a really different kind of spin on things. Like, when you're in that corporate environment and you're not actually thinking about yourself, really. You're kind of thinking about everybody else, and you're kind of just wanting to do a good job and all the rest of it, but you don't actually take time to sit and think, okay, where do I actually need to, the things that I need to improve on, like what am I doing to work on that? So yeah, it's quite interesting hearing you talk about that. And I guess that that all of the things you're talking about, the kind of imposter syndrome, and understanding that you're good, but you're brand new to it, or like it really didn't kind of come out. If that makes sense, there was you wouldn't have been able to tell from the surface.
Yeah, and actually, the gym piece that I mentioned earlier, that I'm working with this gym, and it's been a really interesting workshop to build, because part of it is actually our personalities and working with who we are. And actually, even when it comes down to exercise, like we've got like 4 different personality types, for example. And if you train in terms of who you are, and what your habits are, what your strengths are, you're going to be far better off in the long run than if you try and do. We all know someone that's like, oh, I hate running, but I'm going to do 10k. Like, but why? If you actually if you do things in a way that you enjoy, and that applies across the board, so your strengths, what you value. So many of us don't know what we value, which again becomes more and more clear as my coaching develops with people, because that loss feeling, that disconnection, is because we do so many jobs now that you're just a cog in the system. There's not a start and a finish. You just do part in the middle that we don't actually see. We don't have a visual of what we produce, what we achieve. Apparently, the highest, the happiest industry, the happiest individuals are gardeners, because they actually see a process from start to finish. And we used to have jobs a lot more like that, obviously, but now everything's on a screen, and we kind of do a part of something. We don't ever, that sense of achievement is not so apparent anymore because of how we kind of operate and work. But I get that from coaching, because I work with someone at point A to point B, and we've got everything in the middle, which is all development, and it's all progression. And they might not be absolutely tipped up when they leave, but they're in a very different space to be able to go off and do what they want to do. And I think knowing what you value and knowing why it's important to you can make a huge difference to your overall kind of fulfillment in the long run. And knowing what your strengths are, and if you're a morning person, if you thrive between 7 and 9 a.m. but you're rubbish in the evenings, stuff like that is information. Work with it, not against it. And I think we try and, if you look at these rituals from influencers or whatever's going on online, and you think, oh, I should be up at 5 a.m. and do this and do that and do that. Well, why? Because do it if that's what you want to do and that's what works for you. But if it doesn't, you're just fitting into someone else's blueprint.
Yeah. I'm interested to talk a little bit more about the kind of why thing. And I guess it's so obvious, but it's something that you just don't consciously speak about or think about. Why do I do the things that I do? I don't know. Without literally digging real deep into it, I couldn't tell you why. Because I get up at 5 a.m. I go to the gym. I jump in cold water all the time, and people are like, why do you do that? Well, I think it from the surface it just makes me feel good.
Okay.
But actually really kind of digging into that's going to be, it would be strange to think about. So it feels like this is the the base of a lot of your kind of coaching. Do you find that people struggle to understand, or if you said to somebody, what is your why, do they just answer it? Do they know it, or does it take a lot of conversation? And
well, there's 2 why pieces, isn't there? What is your why is your M piece, so it's why you're doing it to get that result. But there's also why you're not doing it, and I think that's the thing. Coaching, we start where the person is, not where you want to be, but where are you now? And essentially we need to understand that part. And that's not going back, it's not childhood trauma, it's not therapy, but it is saying, well, what is going to get in your way? Let's be realistic about it. If you're not a multimillionaire and you've got no problems, not that they don't have problems, but say you've got nothing going on, great, but that isn't most people. The reality is, if you're time poor, you're stressed, burnt out, depression, money, whatever's going on, all of those are relevant because they all play a part in how we show up. So saying, and like I said, the rhetoric can sometimes oversimplify things, which I think makes people feel worse. Saying that, oh, I just shouldn't feel those things shouldn't affect me and I should just be able to power on. Well, yeah, that's great, but how does it actually work, and does it work? You know, for most people it won't, and then you either burn out, you crash and burn because of you know, people go very, very hard and fast, but you can't sustain that, so then it doesn't actually get you to where you want to be in the long run. And I think, was it Ed Sheeran that said it took 10 years to be an overnight success?
Yeah.
The reality is, hard things take time. And you mentioned it earlier, this whole, you know, to get an end result, to get a good shape in the gym is not easy. It's discipline. It's consistent discipline with diet, with going to the gym or running, walking. It doesn't, you know, whatever it is. So you have to be willing to do that little and often all the time to get the end piece. You can't have both. So you have to do hard things. And I frequently say that in my head about doing hard things, because it doesn't mean you have to suffer in life, but you do have to do things that are a challenge and maybe keep doing them to get a result that you haven't previously had.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we are so conditioned, and it's so easy to just want everything instantly, and we see it so much now that we presume that it's just going to be that quick. And then when it's not, we either tank because we feel emotionally very disappointed and let down, or we think we failed as a person, or we're not able. But it's also, it probably was never realistic in the first place. We just assumed it was.
Yeah, I think that that's a really key point, and I think this is probably one of the core values of this podcast. Really, is that I really worried for like my children's generation. I've got 3 children, 2 of which are teenagers, and I'm really worried for their generation, because you do have influencers that do make a lot of money. And do paint the picture that it's a piece of cake. Like, oh, this is easy, look at me, I'm just recording myself. And I think in some ways it's great that, you know, kids have got these successful role models and they've got somewhere to look up to. But I fear that without them demonstrating the, you know, the hard work and the failures that they've encountered on the way, like, you know, you get to an 18, 19 and you start to think about wanting to start this business, and then the first barrier that you hit is going to probably throw you off, because you're going to be like, oh, it's not as easy as they said it would be, or as they paint the picture that it would be. So I think, you know, it's really important. And you brought up Ed Sheeran, and I think there are two things that he has done and said that have been brilliant. So the first one was when, I'm not sure if it was the same podcast, it might have been the same podcast, but he basically got this guy to bring up a YouTube video of him singing when he was like 12, and he was bad.
Yeah.
Like, he couldn't sing and he couldn't play the guitar. And you kind of think, like, when you look at people like Ed Sheeran, you think that he's just had this God-given gift, and that you could never be like him because he's gifted. But that proves that he's gifted just because he had passion, resilience, and was consistent and kept going, and just kept, just kept chipping away. And the other thing he said, which I think is brilliant, is like, you learn nothing from success. Like, there's no lessons in success. All of your lessons are in the failures that you make. And again, I think that's like so important, because people are just petrified of failing.
Well, what does failure mean? It means that you've done something, tried, and it hasn't worked. And the reason people don't start is because if you don't start, you don't fail. And it doesn't feel great, you know. No one wants to fail, really, but you can't have the other side of it without trying. I mean, I've done heaps of things. I know already I've done heaps of things that have been a waste of time, or they haven't been fruitful. But I have learned. You know, you spend money, you make wrong moves, you invest a lot of time. More than anything, it's time. You know, you go down a route thinking, oh, I'll do this, and you could spend, you know, a long time doing the wrong thing. But you just know you don't do that again. And obviously you can't keep making costly mistakes, but You do have to make some mistakes.
Yeah. So, like, how has that kind of affected what you do now then? So, like, if you've got, if you've like the mistakes you've made in the past, because again, like I kind of the other thing that I always kind of worry about really is like, when do you know it's a bad move, or when do you know it's time to draw a line in the sand? Because if you're doing something and it's kind of not going as well as you thought it was,
Yeah.
but it's not going too badly, and you quite enjoyed doing it, but it's costing you money. When do you get to the point of, right, I need to stop that now, because that's not going to bring me to, get me to where I need to be? Or like, because the flip to that is that keep going, and eventually it'll happen. So is it like a feeling that makes you want to just go, okay, I need to draw a line under the sand now? Because knowing when to quit's really important, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Or is it like, is it like a feeling, or is it like a lack of passion? Like, I can't be bothered with this anymore.
I think maybe a bit of feeling, but I also think it's less emotional than that. I think sometimes it's more just strategy, because essentially there's, what's the goal off what you're doing, and that there has to be a measure of balance with it all, and how long is it taking, what's the outcome that you're desiring, and I guess the measure for everything has to be in they have to be an equal measure in some way, or you're I think I'm not sure. It's a good question.
Does your like, I'm wondering if it's like, how much does your kind of why come into it? Like, I don't know, let's say your why is, I want to make my kids proud, and I want to earn enough money to be able to take them around the world. Like, do you think that kind of comes into it? Or because, this podcast, for example, right? I think I did it because I wanted to prove to myself that I could do something, but a lot of it was that I wanted to lay a good example down for my kids.
Yeah.
And I obviously want to be able to, show them the world and stuff like that. But it's it's very unlikely that this is going to lead to me being able to do that. Like, lead to financial freedom. So like, where do you? It's like, almost like, why do you carry on doing it, and when is the end point? Or is it just like a case of it just runs its course? Like,
well, why do you carry on doing it?
I think that I do see like progress. So every week, it gets more, and the feedback that I get is really good as a general rule. And I really do enjoy doing it. I enjoy having these conversations.
Yeah.
So the flip side to that is it's costly, both time and financially.
Yeah.
And sometimes you kind of, the vanity metrics, like, I was from the start, I knew that I wasn't bothered wholly about like the vanity metrics, how many people are listening, how many people follow me on social media, but you can't help but kind of take notice of it. And sometimes when one podcast has gone really well and you're like, oh, that's good, and then the next one just kind of doesn't really do as well, and you do kind of start to question, like, oh man, like, what is this for? Because I enjoy doing it, because I enjoy having the conversations. I feel like I get a lot out of the conversations.
Yeah.
And I hope that other people do as well.
Yeah.
But then it's almost like, well, if there's only a handful of people that are actually kind of listening to it, then what is the point?
Right. So your why is there's two parts to that, isn't there? It's the fulfillment element, and then the financial and metrics element.
Yeah, probably. I mean, like I said, it's time consuming.
Yes.
It can be an additional stress,
Yes.
and it costs.
Yeah.
It's not cheap to. I mean, the studio is amazing, but it's if I'm doing 2 or 3 a month, or 1 a week at one point, it can start to rack up a little bit. So it's just like, yeah, I often wonder myself what is keeping me going, because I don't think I've ever thought I want to stop. I don't think I've ever thought I'm just gonna knock it on the head. I think I had the conversation once with my wife, and she was just like, "Really? But I thought you enjoyed it." And I was like, "Yeah, I do." She was like, "Well, why are you going to stop it then?" And I was like, "It's kind of a good point."
Well, why did you start?
Why did I start? I think it's I wanted to prove to myself that I could do something on my own without anyone like helping me, I guess.
Yeah.
And I wanted to prove to myself that I could get something off the ground. I think that was it. Like, I've spent my whole life like having ideas and then not doing anything with them, and that was a frustration for me.
Yes.
Because fear of failure totally paralysed me.
Yeah.
So I think I wanted to prove to myself that I could do something.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but I've always wanted to write a book. Don't know why. I'm not very good at writing, but maybe a legacy thing. Maybe just to say I've that's mine. That's my piece of work. And the idea came from that. The idea came from wanting to write a book and then having a really quite uneventful life. So like, what can I write a book about? But then I was aware that like the network of people that I have access to have like had varying successes. So I was always like, yeah, that could like get into other people's minds and work out how they've navigated different things, and that could be like really good content for a book. And that's kind of what led to it. Is a conversation I had with a mate of mine, and I was like, oh yeah, I could just like sit down with people and write down stuff, and then you can use your voice note recorder and just like record the conversation. I was like, that's a good idea. And then he was like, or even better, just do it as a podcast. And I was like, So that's kind of where the idea came from, and then it just kind of went from there. And then obviously our conversations as well. Like that was a big part of it, because I think you really simplified it, because I do what I always do and go, oh yeah, I'd really like to do that. It could be really good. And then look into the logistics of it and then go, oh yeah, but probably no one will ever listen to it anyway, so what's the point? And then it just never happens. So yeah, that's kind of why I started it. And then it's just like, I guess that's the kind of foundation of your coaching conversation, right?
Yeah, and actually what you're saying there is a big trust piece. So a lot of people make promises and break them constantly with themselves, but with doing that, what you do is you actually learn to not trust yourself to take action, and the doing hard things plays into that in a big way, because lots of us struggle with starting things, doing difficult things, making changes, and it's because if we have rinse and repeat made a promise and then not fulfilled it, it doesn't seem like much, but you actually end up eroding that trust within yourself, because there's no one keeping you accountable other than you. You don't have to do it, of course, but with not doing it and repeatedly not doing the things that you want to do, that They're usually things that are going to make us happier. We know that we need it or we want it, and there's a reason for it. But not doing those things in the long run just erodes our self-confidence.
So how do people get around that? Like, how do they? Because I completely understand it. Completely understand it, and I think I don't think I would have been able to get over it without you really kind of breaking it down and kind of simplifying it. So, like, how do people kind of do it?
I think coaching is really, really powerful for that ultimately, because what it does is it's not hard, but we do unpick what is going on in a way that makes things feel so much more achievable. And I think that's where the power lies, is actually, we do have a lot more free will than we tend to think we do, because of how life is. We've got all these responsibilities, we've got all these things that we have to do, and then suddenly everything else dwindles around it that is essentially our autonomy and our time. And I think it's knowing that there's a few things at play, but knowing that you have to do something difficult, you have to do something that you haven't done before. And again, going back to the piece where try and do things that work with who you are as a person is so much easier than trying to do something that isn't who you are. So if you're introverted or extrovert, go on what feels better. Or if you're a morning person or an evening person, because the more we try and fit the blueprints of other people or what we think we need to be, it's so much harder to actually keep moving in the direction that we're trying to go in. And that all comes down to, who are you? What works, what doesn't, and what do we need to change? And it's not actually that simple. So the why piece is, you do a list of everything that is, where are you right now? What are the main things that stop you making these changes? Then we make a list of negotiables and non-negotiables. There might be things in there that we can't change, but that's real. So we don't dismiss that, because actually that's where you're at. But the things you can change, that's where we start then. What can we do within that is who aligns with who you are as a person? If you've got someone that has got terrible self-esteem, terrible confidence, and then you go, right, if you just go and do a motivational speech on a stage, it's not going to work. Start small, really, really small. And the James Clear book, Atomic Habits, is great for that, because actually I think he talks about, put one shoe out for the gym and then put two shoes out for the gym. And you think, it seems so simple and silly at the time. But actually, if it works and it makes you then start to do small things often, that's where the power is just doing the little things often. And my friend said to me the other day, we went out for lunch, and she said to me, but what is it that you do to keep going back to those things that are quite disciplined? And I think it's very hard to explain. I think I'm very good at just carrying on with the same small things, but none of them are huge, and none of them are so overwhelming that they freeze me. And I think that's, again, important to recognize, that do things that are within your remit with some healthy stretch, because you do need to then put yourself out there with certain things if you do want to grow. But start with things that you can do, or you don't find as taxing, because you will thrive a lot more quickly than if you just try and do things that are just not who you are as a person.
Yeah. It's you just reminded me, actually, because I think it was you that mentioned the James Clear book.
Yes.
When we were doing that, and I went and bought it and I read it, and super powerful. And it's something that I do, and I make sure that I pack my gym bag, the night before.
Yep.
Go to the gym and go straight to work.
Yes.
So all my clothes is already in the gym bag, so I know that when I wake up in the morning, it feels like I've got to go, because my bag's packed and my lunch is ready and everything's laid out for me, ready to go to the gym. So it's like, almost like a pathway to having to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a super cool book.
And it's working with it's making those things that are already a bit of a drudge. It's making them more streamlined, because because he talks about it in the book, doesn't he? Like every stage that there is that gets in the way of you not doing that thing is just information that you're like, well, I just can't be asked, because you've got all of these blocks. But if you have those things already teed up, or a lot more teed up than initially, it's a lot easier to do those things that then end up feeling like they're a real drag.
Yeah, I think it's like, oh, it's so like I kind of understand wholly how people can get caught in this kind of trap of procrastination, I guess. You
Of
know,
what,
like
sorry?
the procrastination. People say that they want something, but just don't know how to take the first step, or are too scared to take the first step.
Yes.
How do you help people in that sense?
I think there is a big problem for a lot of us actually now, is the amount of information we have available and the amount of information we consume. Initially, my business was called the Self-Help Junkie, and I've since changed the branding. And the reason I called it that was because it's so easy to consume and feel like you're being productive, but you do nothing with that information. And the information is very valuable, and it's powerful, and it's amazing a lot of the time. But if you don't actually do something off the back of knowing more, you stay in the same place. Our brains, though, believe that we are doing something still. So because you're learning, it feels like your brain is like, oh, we're still being productive, so we're still making steps towards that thing. But the amount of people that you hear about that consume, we buy all these self-help books, courses, whatever it is, to make a change, and they understand everything about what's going on with them and why they need to make the change, but they don't make the change. And it's a real problem, because it feels like you're being productive. Your brain thinks you're doing something, so you're like, oh, I'm growing. But if you're not actually taking the action from the knowing, you're still in the same place.
So why do people do that? Because that is definitely something I'm guilty of. So I will like research the crap out of something.
Yes.
And exactly as you say,
Yeah.
feel like I'm doing that thing.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. This is good because I'm gonna stop drinking soon.
Yeah.
But not yet. I'm just gonna read these books first,
Yeah.
and then they're gonna teach me how to stop drinking. But I won't stop drinking until I've read the books, which is in like 8 weeks or whatever. And why do people do that?
Because it's comfortable. Actually doing the thing and then putting yourself out there is, for whatever reason, is where it then feels really quite hideous at times. So learning information, learning it on your own timeline or whatever that looks like, is not actually taxing. It's just consuming. A podcast or a book or this and that. It's not particularly uncomfortable. Applying that information and doing something about it is really uncomfortable, especially if you've been stuck for a long time, because that is so far away from where you know. And as much as where we know might be miserable and unhappy, it's also familiar. And our brains are not necessarily designed to make us happy. They're designed to keep us safe. So if that is like, oh, well, you know what to expect, and a lot of us we like that, then you tend to stay there, because it's still like, where you're at. There's no shocks that are going to catch you out. There's nothing that you're not expecting. As soon as you then come out of that space, you have no idea what to expect. That doesn't feel great, even though you want it. And the other side of that, which is obviously your comfort zone, the other side of that is going to be great, but you have to do the bit in the middle. And the bit in the middle is where it's very easy to retract and go straight back to, yeah. I mean, the amount of people in crappy jobs that they don't like them, but they know them. So if you know your job and you know what to expect and you make do, as soon as you try and get something else, you might be rejected. You might be told you're not quite there. You might be told you need to do more training. That's all hard stuff. That doesn't feel great.
So how do people get out of that?
You have to start, but you have to start realistically and small. And you have to a lot of it is understanding what needs to change in the first place, because like if we go straight back to the fitness analogy, people know what they need to do, but it's why can they not do it? And it will usually be the same things: the fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of being seen. You know, truly being seen is quite daunting. It's very vulnerable. And even you know, myself, I'm on the whole a confident person, quite extroverted by nature, can speak with anyone, but the social media side of things and putting myself out there is still shit scary, because you're putting yourself out there to be, you know, the good comments, but also the bad, and those are not so fun. So it's all of those things that you have to navigate and keep going with. And I think maybe a huge part of that, for me personally anyway, as an extrovert, is having the right people around you, people that have a similar mindset. They don't need to be taking over the world. They don't need to be doing these, you know, amazing things that make you then start to feel shit because you're not quite there. But I think just people that have the belief that those things are still achievable. Because people that, and if people struggle with that in the first place, it's very difficult for you to feel, have that strength if you have felt both sides. So you do want something differently, but you're around a lot of people that don't believe that that's possible for them. So it's getting in the right places, being around the right people, and yeah, just doing things realistically that stretch you but don't overwhelm you. And I do think that's a huge part. And I would say, especially as well in the UK, I find that our mindset here is quite tough with a lot of things. We are quite pessimistic, and compared to America, they're quite gung-ho, a bit more positive about things. And I think that influence as well culturally here is quite intrinsic within a lot of us. We often go to the, well, that's a load of rubbish, before we, you know, can get to the other side of things. And that's a tough one to crack, because again, a lot of people around you, a lot of the messages around you, especially at the moment, it's, you know, it's quite dour. So it's being aware of that as well, and trying to rationalize and cut through the noise. And one example that I did for myself was I was on a lot of coaching pages, lots of coaching pages on Facebook, on Instagram, and I actually got rid of a lot of them, because you end up you're aware of so much, but it's not necessarily helpful. And if you can stay in your own lane, which I know is like easier said than done, but if you can, and you have that focus where you're aware of things to a degree, and you've got a healthy influence, but nothing that then, if it starts to tip the balance and make you either doubt your abilities, or you go back to kind of that old way of thinking, then it's knowing that that's not necessarily always helpful to just know more and more and more.
Do you think there's anyone that's like gone too far gone? Like, as an example, you know, I've encountered so many people over the years that are so unfulfilled in their work, but just plod on because, like you say, it's easy and it's what they know. Do you think there's like a point where it's too difficult? So like, and I'm probably talking about a period of time more than anything.
Yeah.
You know, like somebody that's done the same job for 20 years, is it like, is it just, you're never going to get out of that because you're so ingrained into that life that it's just going to be difficult to change? Or do you think that anyone can just get their head out the clouds and be like, I need to make it, you know, I need to change something?
I think you can always make changes, but I do think there is a huge part of it which is also be realistic about what is around you. Because if you are terribly unfilled with your job, but it pays exceedingly well and you've got huge debts, there's always everything comes in like it's layered, isn't it? And there's lots of moving parts. So if we could just go, oh, we'll just change it and that was it, we would all do it. But there's so many reasons why we don't. And I think that's the difficult part, is, and it's different for every single person. I think you can always make changes, but I think those changes are actually very subjective sometimes. It's not to say they're not doable. Like, for example, for me, I could have made a change much sooner, which I acknowledge, but that would have meant giving up my home and business. Now, I didn't want to give up my home and business. That's a really tough call to make, but it was pretty much the only one left that wasn't going to keep me exactly where I was, which I wasn't happy. So there's a cost, and there is always a cost with our decisions, and also not making a decision, there's a cost. So your cost is, you pick your hard, and it's not always very straightforward. And I think we have to give ourselves that compassion, because ultimately, my situation has changed due to being in a relationship. Now, I couldn't do that on my own. I went round and round and round and round in circles for a long time. I was very unhappy, but the only compromise I could make was to get rid of everything that I'd worked so hard to also keep hold of. Now, you could argue, well, did you want it enough? I did, but I didn't also want to give up everything I'd worked for. And it's not to say that, I have compassion for that time, because I worked incredibly hard to keep it, but I worked incredibly hard to stay in the wrong place. But also that's what represented a lot of security and safety at the time. And I think if you actually look at things in a more holistic way, in a human-centered way, rather than, just the external side of stuff, it's a very different approach, because there's a heap of reasons why people don't make change. There's a heap of reasons why people struggle. A lot of them are, they're emotional. So, for everyone, we all know, we've had friends go, oh, just get rid of them. Just, I don't know, just end your relationship. Just sell your house. Just do that. Well, okay, well, you just do it then. It's not easy. And those decisions are huge, with huge consequences. And whilst change is always, I think, achievable, I think there are reasons that, if you look at those reasons first as to why it's so difficult, they play a huge part in why people don't change. Kids, no kids, money, lives. There's so much that comes into it.
It's almost like, sounds really weird. It sounds really weird, me saying this, but it's almost like, so I've got a plan, right?
Yeah.
I've got a plan that I know would work.
Yeah.
Right? And I know that I could make a good living from.
Yeah.
But I'm in a job that I enjoy.
Yeah.
And, and it pays me enough money to, service whatever it is I need to service. And I'm not unhappy, but it's almost like, if they fired me tomorrow, it would force me into carrying out the plan that I've got.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's like, it's almost like being fired. Like we go through our lives feeling such pressure to, hold a job. It's quite, difficult. Now there's a lot of people being laid off, and it's quite a volatile environment. So you kind of have this anxiety of, Jesus, imagine that tomorrow I'm out of a job and I earn nothing. So it's like, it's really daunting to think that, and and it causes, a bit of anxiety, because then you're like, shit, what if that did happen? Like, it's not unrealistic for that to happen.
Yeah, of course.
But then if it did happen, I'm pretty certain it would probably be really positive in the end.
Yeah.
Like, it might take 6 months of being in an absolute shit state. And there'll be things that you have to let go of. Like, maybe I'd have to sell the car. Maybe I'd, you know, you'd have to downsize, but 6 months down the line, chances are you're probably going to be in a better situation than you are right now. So how like, you know, that's a forced move, because, you know, people don't really want to be in that uncomfortable situation for 6 months. But why do people not think long term? So, okay, where will I be in 12 months if I do this now? Why do people just fear the immediate future?
Security. Because everything you said there is basically like, well, you know, I could be uncomfortable and potentially have a lot more, but right now it's secure. And if you know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, security is you know, it's fundamental. So a lot of us will you know, pick what feels safer naturally, because that's how we're engineered, over something that doesn't feel as safe. It's easier to pick something that's not as safe if you've got a lot of, like I said, the right things around that decision in the first place. If you don't have those strong pillars of your other needs being met, that risk is monumental. If all of those other things are sweet and you might have a bit of money in the bank, it's much easier to take a risk. So it comes back to how safe you feel environmentally, emotionally, and financially, potentially, to be able to take that leap. But then there's also ways you can do things without taking an enormous risk, which might be a lot easier with starting something online or doing it at home potentially. But to do a risk like what you were saying, you know, you have to go all in because you've got no choice. That's a bit different. But the security is instantly gone. So then you'll hustle for it.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Like it's something that I kind of beat around all the time, and I feel really lucky that I'm in a job that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
And I work with great people, and I feel really quite, you know, quite blessed, I guess, because of that. I've been in jobs before where I literally find it difficult to get myself into the office and just dread it every day. But then I wasn't as mature back then, you know, perhaps. And this is the other thing that I find quite fascinating. Turning back to the time where I did despise my job. We had nothing back then because my wife wasn't working because she had, you know, a young kid, and I was earning not a lot of money at the time. I was in my first ever office job, and I hated it with a passion. That would have been so easy for me because I wasn't losing a lot. I could have just kind of done it then. But it wasn't even fathomable. Like it wasn't even something that I would think about at that age. But then now I'm in a position where we've, you know, built up a career and, you know, family and, you know, home and all the rest of it, and all those things depend on, you know, me going up the ladder and, you know, my wife being in work, and, you know, it's like almost impossible now to chuck all that away and go and start something yourself. Like, it's a huge risk, isn't it? Especially when you have worked your way into a role that you really do enjoy and you see a lot of future in.
Yeah.
So, like, I always wonder how people do that. And I guess that would come down to one of two things, and I think it goes back to your push and pull analogy. So I guess it's either being pushed from something that you really don't like, or being pulled towards something that you are super, super, super passionate about.
Yeah.
And you just want to kind of go, that's what I want to do. So I guess that's kind of what you did in a way, right? You were from the dog walking to the coaching.
Yeah. And I wanted something that was... I spent a lot of time on my own, and I definitely wanted to feel a lot more connected to other people. I think with screens, I think with COVID, with lots of things in general, I certainly feel a lot more space all the time, and even now with AI coming up, it's easier and easier to not actually do things with each other anymore. And I most of my coaching recently has been in person, and I just think it's hard to imagine the world where we don't have, we don't spend as much time with each other anymore, and there's not this desire to. And I I'm very intentional with that, and in day-to-day life is I want to do more in person again, more in real life, and it does feel like it's going against the grain, whereas so much of everything else is going the other way. But even like online dating is a great example. I think there's a lot of human experiences we've optimized, not because we should have, we just have done because we wanted to and it makes money. But actually, I think the long term outcome is much worse. I like dating is just an absolute nightmare these days, and there's so much that it's played into with trying to make love an algorithm when it's a human experience where you should be make eye contact and be able to speak to each other and all these things, and it's fundamentally changed. And I think there's a lot of that with so many of the things we do now, and I think we're constantly disconnecting from each other, and especially things that I don't think you can optimize as an algorithm. When we're very nuanced and we're very complex as a species, and just because we can do these things, I don't think they're always necessarily a positive.
No, and yeah, I find like the whole dating thing really weird. And I mean, I guess I'm lucky enough to be from a generation where, excuse me, that didn't really exist. But I guess I find it odd that, I mean, like, I don't know. I've never been on a date, which is weird. Like, I've never been on in a situation where you're going to meet someone with a view to get into a relationship.
Yeah.
I feel like it puts pressure on that conversation.
Yes, yeah.
Because you're not just getting to know someone, you're going there because you're interested in a relationship, the other person's interested in a relationship. I guess they've looked at pictures of each other and found themselves found each other attracted to each other, and then all of a sudden you're in this kind of melting pot of, okay, do we get on, do we not get on, what do I like, what do I not like, oh, I don't like that about her, you know what I mean? And it's like
there's nothing organic left, is there, in it? Because it everything that dating was, because dating is ultimately filtering, isn't it? So, and it's filtering in the right way, because we don't just meet one person and then instantly love everything about them and they're our person. That's not realistic. So we go there under the pretense that we normally like what they look like, and then everything else follows. But I think what apps have done is just made it incredibly sterile. And the expectations are right up here, and we are all imperfect, messy people with a past, with triggers, with lots going on, and I think there is such a mismatch that you have such a high fail rate, because we go in thinking, oh, I like what they look like, and hopefully they've got all of these things that I want in a person, and then we go, actually they're quite annoying, I didn't really preempt that. So it's and people are single for a long time now, and it's tough. It's become very, very difficult, I think.
Do you think it's contributed to like the divorce rates? Because like divorce rates are crazy now. I think it's like one in two married couples or it might even be more, are ending in divorce.
I don't know about divorce, but I know birth rates in particular are quite low, and I think people are not getting married as much, and in general, I think we've got a connection crisis though, and it goes back to everything being optimized and on a screen, because and even my friends that a few years ago we were much tighter than we are now, and I think you can really feel this kind of straying from people where we're all doing different things to with our free time, potentially working from home culture shifted how we the dynamic of life, And I mull it over sometimes, and I think we need healthy urgency day to day, but we don't need so much that we feel exhausted and burnt out, which is how, you know, a lot of people were prior COVID. But I think you also need a reason to do something sometimes, and it's very easy when you work from home and then everything's like at home and you can order your food. You can literally never leave the house if you don't want to. And now find love, you know, all these human experiences that you're meant to actually put some effort in and do. It's basically it's taking the value away from things in a big way. And with dating in particular, you've got so much choice that you choose nothing. If you go on Netflix, you've got so much choice. You spend, you know, half an hour looking at stuff because there's so much choice. You don't choose anything. You're like, oh, I've got all of those options. And then you've got Prime, and you've got all the others as well. You've got so many options. You don't need to pick anything, or you spend ages picking something. And we do the same with dating.
So true, isn't it? It is so true. And I almost like, I don't know, I fear that, you know, people are getting into, or maybe not getting into relationships for the wrong reasons, but they're meeting people for the wrong reasons. You know, like when I was young and none of this was existed. You know, I'm old enough to remember the days of no internet, you know, and it just like going down the local payphone to phone people so that my parents didn't hear me on the phone to, you know what I mean? Like those times, but you built up a relationship and then came the, you know, or actually, I do actually quite like this person in a romantic way. But now it feels like it's the opposite. You're like, oh, I like that person because she looks really nice and I want to be in a romantic relationship with them. So you commit to that and then the getting to know each other kind of happens.
Try and make it fit.
After.
Absolutely, yeah.
Really
I think
weird,
it's increased the pace of things and the pressure, you're right. And I think there's a problem with it, especially if you want children or if you do want certain things, you go into it for the wrong reasons because you want those things, but is it the right person you want those things with? And it's you've got all of these choices. It's a real minefield now.
Yeah, and it is one, you know. Are people getting into relationships for the right reasons? Do they just want the security?
Yeah.
You know, people just don't want to be alone, so they'll just take, you know, and like whilst you mentioned that people have got really high standards now and they stay single for a long time because they can't find anyone to.
Yeah.
I guess the flip to that is people that don't really give a shit. They just don't want to be on their own.
Yeah.
So they end up in an unhappy relationship because they're petrified of being alone.
Yes.
It's just a minefield, isn't it? Like, and I worry for the kind of next generation of kids being brought up in those environments because, God, I don't know.
I think as well, on the whole screens connection, the way society and culture's going and a lot more AI and all of that is... I notice being single, especially post-pandemic, there's, you know, people have changed, life has changed. Fundamentally, there's been a lot going on. And my friends drifted a lot. And I think if you're single, because people have become a lot more, and I've heard that there's a loneliness epidemic and things like that. I think if you're single, it's a double-edged sword now because your network everyone is kind of a lot more disconnected. You don't feel nearly as close to people as you maybe once did. And then if you're not in a relationship as well, it's even more obvious because you don't necessarily have this network of people. And then the cost of things to go out and do anything has gone through the roof. So that, again, it limits you even further. So I think it's a big melting pot of lots of different things going on at the same time. And it creates like a real issue. And I think what and you see it on TikTok and things like that an awful lot is, I think the importance of a romantic relationship is so high because actually that now is fulfilling the needs of all the other things that have moved away, which is very unrealistic and unhealthy, but I can see why it's happening, because if you don't feel close to anyone anymore, or you're struggling to stay connected, or geographically we all move a lot more now and things like that, your relationship becomes all of those things, which then means it's right up here, which is, you know, understandable, but it's not necessarily healthy. And we expect an awful lot of that person to fulfill those needs that we our parents, our family, our friends, and all of that once did. Our work colleagues, you know, friends, work colleagues, they kind of, it's all drifted away a lot more. So if you don't have that and you don't have a relationship, and the cost of everything, and you're doing it on your own, it's a very, very vulnerable place to be. So I agree, you the intentions are not always probably coming from the right place, because you've got people, you know, and then you've got the mental health side of things where it's become very tough to be on your own, without a doubt.
And then the other thing I think that's playing a big part is like social media, for the same reasons that we spoke about earlier, but like, you know, you get these couple influencers or influencers that pretend that they've got this magical relationship with their partners, and they just paint the picture of being this perfect little family unit. And then of course that leaves everybody else thinking, well, I haven't got that.
Yeah.
So does this mean that I'm unhappy in my relationship? You know, and it causes unrest, I guess, like people thinking, well, I want that.
Absolutely.
But the reality is that it's probably not like that.
And you can apply that to almost anything now.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real issue with our expectations. And I admit my expectations are quite high, but you know, you could be doing really well, but you just move your goalposts, and it's not always particularly good. But there's a fine line, isn't there, between ambition and gratitude, and you know, being happy with what you've got as well as wanting more. But then, is the wanting more coming from an external or internal place? Is it things, or is it a feeling? And then they're very different things, you know, they're very different desires and drivers. So I think social media is horrendous for, you know, a lot of people feel like they're lacking because they're not going to the Maldives twice a year.
Yeah.
But you know, my parents, they think it's nuts, because they're from a generation that none of it was normal. None of this, you know, a very average normal wage was seen as fab.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's seen as you're not doing well.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I think being average is fine. If you want more, that's still fine. But knowing that, you know, if you're still smashing it just in the middle, that's also, if you're happy and it's all working, it's still a good place to be. But I think, again, we've got a real disconnect with our expectations, and we were never designed, and we never have lived in a time where we saw so much of it. If we didn't see it like we see it now, we wouldn't feel this way.
No.
But because you constantly are aware of how life could be, but you're not there, you constantly feel dissatisfied.
And it's like understanding as well that it's a journey.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, you mentioned before, like that this we live in a world of instant gratification. People don't want to spend 2 years working towards getting to that. So like, you know, it might be an ambition to, I don't know, go to Maldives twice a year and live in a big house and drive a nice car.
Yeah.
But people want it now, and they're depressed because they haven't got it now, rather than thinking, well, I could get that. It means I've got to go through 2 years of graft and failure, and you know, they don't see that bit. And who was it that said it? It was Jimmy Carr, when he said, everybody wants what I've got, but nobody wants to do what I've done to get it.
Yeah.
And it's like, that is like, for me,
poignant.
It's so true, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's, you know, like I've spent the last 6 months in particular, since I sold my business, just sort of getting my head down and focusing. But actually most of it is coming up with hitting blocks, mental blocks, not really knowing what to do, figuring things out, learning things, understanding something. Because and especially when you're on your own, when you're self-employed and you're trying to develop something, it can be a tough place because most of it is just quite shit, and you're just figuring stuff out all the time. And you can get mentors and you can do all sorts, obviously, but there's a lot that comes with it that is so glamorized, I think, sometimes online. And actually, the reality is quite different. It's a lot of winging it. I often think that, like, you go into things and you think, I've just got to give it a go, and actually I'll figure stuff out because it's all information. Like, no, it might not be particularly positive, but you still know that you're like, right, okay, well, I know what I need to do next time. And it's hard because and I saw a friend yesterday, and they've built a big business, and she was saying that her husband spent 18 months developing something and nothing took off for ages, and then it's suddenly taking off, but now it's taking off in a big way. And I often think that's the case because all of that foundation work feels very unsatisfying. It's boring, it's tiring, it's repetitive, it's not fulfilling a lot of the time. The back office stuff to building a business, the structures, the whatever that is not the sexy stuff. But without that, and without all the focus on that, you don't have the end. And it's that part that is easy to just go, I can't be arsed because what am I getting from this?
Yeah.
But it's only with that consistency and that focus in that same area in the right way that you then hopefully come out the other side, and then it starts to build a bit of traction.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, and I mean, like, it is tricky, isn't it? Because you've got to take the first step, which is daunting. You don't really want to fail. You're frightened of it, so you get past that piece, and you're like, right, okay, I've done the hard bit. The hard bit's kind of taken the first step. And then you start to do stuff, and as you point out, it's like finding consistency with no reward. It's got to be so tricky, isn't it? And then like you say, eventually you start to get traction, and eventually things start to come out, and it's like almost like the kind of hockey stick type, like curve of success, I guess. But it's getting through the bit that's flat, and just keep going. That's the difficult bit.
Absolutely. And it's same with going back to the gym analogy. You spend a long time doing it and you're like, oh, this is not fun, but then 6 months time things look quite different. So it's unrewarding at the start, and I think that's difficult to keep going with because we are used to things being so fast. And doing hard things, and to keep doing something that's not particularly fun and not getting a reward for it is particularly unsatisfying.
Yeah.
So you won't always be motivated, but if you can be consistent, and just keep going in some form, that is where it's golden, really, because the motivation will fade, because when you don't get a reward, it's very hard to kind of keep being like, oh yeah, I'm loving it, because you're not loving it necessarily.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things. I think gratitude's really important. So always looking back, and just in this conversation, I remember you and I talking about where I wanted to be, and there was a list of things. I don't know if you remember. There's a list of things that I was like, I want to be doing this, I want to be doing that, and I want to be doing this. And like, actually, I am doing. That I am doing a lot of those things that we were kind of ticking off, but I've never kind of stopped and thought, oh yeah, that was only a year ago, or like a year and a bit ago. So that's one bit, and then the other bit is like you almost become accustomed to the successes, the small successes that you get, and then they become like it's not enough.
Yeah.
So again, just using the health thing as an example. You start losing a kilo a week, which is good, right? It's good, right? So that's a lot of weight. But then you start thinking, I want to lose more than that. And again, like you're literally making progress, but you're kind of still not satisfied with it because it's not enough. So it's like, again, like being able to go, okay, where was I at the start of this? I was here, and now I'm here. Right, that is like really good progress. That if I carry on with that trajectory for the next 8 months, I'll be here. Jesus. Do you know what I mean? And I guess it's like just taking stock of that sometimes and just kind of pulling yourself out of the situation and yeah, kind of having a bit of a holistic view of it all.
It's the starting, and then it's the keeping going, because if you say you get to your goal for fitness, you then have to maintain it. So the starting is so daunting because it's not it shines a light on doing something that you've not done before or potentially never done, which is really scary. But then it also means maintaining it, because if you want to result, you're going to have to keep doing that thing in some capacity, of some shape, some form. So that is quite overwhelming as well to think about, because you're like, oh, well, I want to get to that body or that whatever it is, that business, but that means I also have to keep doing those things. And that's, because there's no measure then of when that ends. And that's quite a lot to process, you know, especially from where you're at. If you've been in a place that is very familiar, it's an awful lot to kind of consider.
Yeah, and I guess for me it's like about understanding that, that everybody goes through that, right?
Yeah.
There's not. It's really easy to put people on a pedestal and say, well, look at that person, he's, got the body of a god, but he must have been, born with those kind of genetics where the chances are that guy's probably working twice as hard as anybody else in the gym, and has remained consistent for the last 2.5 years, and doesn't go out and makes loads of sacrifices to be that person. And I think that sometimes we're guilty of thinking that we could never be that person, when actually we could, if we were willing to make the sacrifices that person's made. Again, yeah, I find that quite interesting.
Yeah, and also, like, because to look like that is quite an extreme example. But then if you get halfway to looking like that, and that's enough for you, it's maintaining that level, isn't it? Rather than going to the extremes, because essentially it's what we want and what's enough for us, and actually that might not be the extreme epitome of everything, but it's also enough to make us feel a lot more content.
Yeah, definitely. I've got some quick fire questions for you,
okay.
If that's all right. If you could put 3 things down to where you are today, so the journey that you've been on, what 3 things would you say have kind of helped you the most?
3 things are: always ask, because if you ask the question and they say no, you're only where you're at, but you could potentially be a lot further along. So even though I know that sounds really simple and but essentially you're only going to be where you're at. So you're not being rejected, you're not going further back, nothing's taking you back to where you didn't want to be. You're only going to be in the position you're already in. So if you reframe that and you actually just say, I'll ask because that potentially means that, but if they say no, I'm just still here, it's disappointing, but you're still here, which is probably a lot further along than where you were. And that's a really nice way of looking at it, because actually it makes rejection less personal. Because it isn't easy. It's not easy putting yourself out there and pitching and doing whatever you need to do, because that is, we often it's tied to who we are, which is why it can feel so personal when it doesn't go our way. So that would be my first one. The second one is consistency is key, which is, I appreciate, not easy. But as I've explained, I would say little and often, if you have a week off from something, that's fine. It's not a problem, because if we berate ourselves, it's not helpful in the long run, regardless. So try and tune out from some of the noise that makes you feel less than, because some of it is not helpful. As I mentioned before, it might seem like it's inspirational, but it ends up making you just feel like you're not doing enough. That's actually counterproductive. But if you can just go, oh, do you know what, I ate like shit this week, I had pizza, I don't know, whatever you did, I didn't go to the gym, but I'll start again next week, and then you just keep it ticking over, but in a way that's realistic to you and your life, what is happening right now. Work with what is going on. That doesn't mean to say that you use everything as an excuse not to do it, but be realistic about those things that are happening right now. Negotiables, non-negotiables, what can you change? Make it empowering, and I think that's what I'm saying, because if you do things that are just not who you are, you just won't stick with them.
Yeah.
And the third one, it's a mixture of putting yourself out there and getting around the right people. Which is similar to the first one about asking, but just don't ask as many questions as you want, and don't feel bad for not knowing, because people that are growing and people that are doing things, I've coached successful people, and they're all very, very similar. And they're amazing to coach because they've got very similar traits. They act in the same way, they behave in the same way. They are so robust when it comes to the external, which is where a lot of us tend to fall down, and they're quite gung-ho in their approach. And I think if you're around people who are like that, and you observe them, ask them questions, how do they act like that, or why do they act like that, where's it come from, and what's made them that way, and things that you don't know how to do, because people are very happy to share that kind of knowledge, especially if they are, it's quite flattering on the whole, so people quite like to share how they've done things, but people that are doing more than you don't take it as a negative. They just see it as someone that wants to learn.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Would you change anything about your journey?
That's a good question. I think there are two things for me. Firstly, I feel like I stayed in the wrong place far too long. I did everything right to end up in the wrong place, and I paid a heavy price for that in time. A big chunk of time passed me by. A big part of sort of my younger years as well, and not having loads of heavy responsibilities. I felt so stuck that I felt very trapped and suffocated. But like I said earlier, that comes at a big cost of I had to flip the script in such a huge way that was terrifying as well. But I do think I stayed too long, and actually now all of those things have changed. It's not nearly as scary as I first thought. But then, of course, like I said, my pillars around that have changed. The other thing would be that I've definitely got a block for putting myself out there, and I do it a lot in certain ways, but not the vulnerability can only go so far, where I feel like it still needs a lot of work. So I've gone into businesses and just pitched there and then one person, but it doesn't go anywhere, and as much as it's scary, the rejection is only between two people, and then I'm like, okay, it's all good. Whereas online I find so daunting, because it's a real testament of who I am and linked to what I represent, which I am incredibly proud of, and I think that I love coaching and what it does for people, but I haven't had that where I've had to put myself out there online, and I think that step for me is definitely something I'm very aware of, being a real vulnerability still.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of people are the other way around. A lot of people are quite happy to do the online stuff, but are petrified of going in and speaking to somebody face to face.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. What's next for you?
So this year I've built a course called Stuck to Starting, which is just a starting point, because like I said, there's a lot going on with people that it's being realistic about where you start. It's not going to be, a life-changing thing immediately, but what it does is it just knuckles into the initial starting point of why do we find it so hard to start things. And I'm also working with an independent gym. They've got 15 gyms which to do a piece in-house about like I said, it goes back to the why. So if we've got these goals, why do we find certain things hard? So we talk about our personalities and how our personalities define how we approach things, because they do. Also push and pull motivation, as I mentioned earlier. The wheel of life, which is a great one in terms of how what we need in our lives, which is subjective again, but what's lacking and what needs work. So that's a really interesting piece to work with the members of the gym to kind of the other side of fitness and the holistic side of things, really. And then around that, I've just got my private clients.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's really cool about the whole thing you're doing in the gym, because you're so right, like the mental side. I heard a really cool quote actually, and it's so true. It's that the heaviest weight in the gym's the weight at the front door, like you know, actually getting in. So yeah, I guess being able to break those barriers down and go exercise is like, really important and probably overlooked.
Yeah, and it's looking at it from a very different approach of actually who you are, how you operate in the world, because we all have our ways, morning person, evening person, or whatever those things are, and working with them. So I think essentially the more we understand about who we are and how we work as a person, firstly we need to know what they are, because most of us are going through day to day and don't have a clue. And then once we've identified those, it's how do we build better structures that complement those things, rather than, you get say a PT that's very, I don't know, ex-military, and they're very sort of do these things in this way and that's it. There's so many reasons why people struggle to get there in the first place, and it's actually working with them as a bespoke model and a holistic model that's person-centered, rather than just a physical outcome, which is still healthy and it still might be hitting their goals, but actually how do we make that journey a lot easier to get to?
Yeah, that's really important.
Yeah.
What how do people get in touch with you if they want to kind of find out more about what you do?
So I'm on LinkedIn, Bespoke Balance Coaching, and also I've got a website, and those are the best ways to reach out.
Amazing. It's been brilliant chatting to you. It feels like it's been a long time coming. And but yeah, I think genuinely think the work you do is like really important. I know that the effect that it can have firsthand, because I've seen it from watching you coach somebody and that person developing in a corporate space so much, but also personally as well. The coaching that we did when in the GE environment was so helpful. Like, it's unlocked so many things that I do now that I wasn't doing back then. So yeah, really appreciate that, and I can't emphasize how much how important the work that you're doing is. So yeah, really appreciate you coming along, and yeah, obviously wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you.
It's the Grind Diaries, podcast where we share all our hustle stories. From the struggles to the grind, we spill it on the mics. So sit back, relax, and let us take you for a ride. Welcome to the world where dreams become reality, where we crack the code to success, no doubt.